Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining today's webinar or today's Ask a Professional Scrum Trainer. My name is Eric Naberg. I'll be your host today. I run marketing and operations here at Scrum.org, and I'm joined by our Professional Scrum Trainer, Jim Sammons. Jim is here to take your questions and hopefully answer those questions as well. A little quick overview, and then we'll get started. This series is your opportunity to ask our professional Scrum experts like Jim your pressing questions. And those questions that we do not get to throughout the webinar, because generally we have more questions than time, Jim will respond to those the best he can via email following the session. Some quick guidelines: your microphones will be muted, but you can add your questions, as I see people already are, so you've been preparing. In the questions window in the chat. So feel free to add those questions and we'll take them as quickly as we can. A little bit about Scrum.org. Scrum.org is founded by, and our chairman is Ken Schwaber. Ken is the co-creator of Scrum. He was the one who presented Scrum the first time back at UPSLA 1995, some 25 years ago. And we focus on training, trainers, books, resources, and lots of different things, many of those resources being free, like this webinar today, as well as validation, both open free assessments and those for certification, and continuing to evolve and work on Scrum, as Ken is doing right now, working on Scrum and the Scrum Guide. Our different training goes across the gamut from introduction to Scrum and learning how to apply Scrum at the team level with professional Scrum foundations around the different roles, and then building bridges to other practices that can be brought in and work together with Scrum, like Kanban, like user experience. And all of our training is very consistent around the world. So all of our 320 plus trainers around the world, like Jim, are teaching the same content, same material, and bringing their own real world experiences, as you'll hear from Jim in a moment. So very consistent, but also very heavily exercise based and like. Our certifications that go along with that, they're globally recognized. You never have to renew. Once you've passed the test, you've passed the test, and highly respected. Everything is based on a series of competencies, or a Scrum competency model. And you can learn more about that on our website. And I'll let Jim introduce himself, and we'll take it from there. Jim, all yours.
Thanks, Eric. So this is just a small about me slide that I use in some of my classes. I'm not going to read it to you, but I am a geek through and through. I call myself a child of the 80s. You know, I have a particular affinity for that type of nostalgia. I am currently residing in Columbus, Ohio, by way of Central Illinois, though. So that's why you'll see both a mixture of Ohio and Illinois-based fandoms, if you will, on my page there. I am currently an agile coach and consultant for Insight, and I'm one of their professional Scrum trainers. So I kind of spend my time both doing and teaching and training, which I think is just the, you know, kind of the best setup I have. I have a dream job because I get to teach what I love, and then I get to go practice it and learn in the real world. So my time training makes me a better coach and consultant, and my time coaching makes me a better trainer. I drink a lot of coffee. I do play a lot of board games and watch occasionally too much Netflix and YouTube. So those are some kind of fun things. In addition to being a professional Scrum trainer with Scrum.org, I'm also a certified LESS practitioner and a SAFe SPC. But I think you'll see through this conversation, I have a particular love of Scrum.org and the Scrum framework. But I wanted to be well-rounded and pragmatic. So if I have an opinion on something, I like to really base that opinion on, you know, empirical data and my actual experiences. And then I also know that Scrum's a lightweight framework, so it doesn't answer every question for us. So I wanted to kind of open my mind and experience to other methods and frameworks so that we can use really good Scrum to meet many different needs. And that's what I really like about some of these other models like Less and other things is they're all built on really good Scrum, and that's lost a lot of times. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. Feel free to send me an email. I love to stay in contact with both former clients and students and just peers and colleagues in the industry. So LinkedIn's kind of my primary way of doing that. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Great, thanks, Jim. And I think we've got lots of questions already coming in, so we're ready to get started again. Quick
Awesome.
guidelines: you will be muted, but Jim will take your questions. So just put them in the box there, and you'll be all set. So the first question, just kind of a common one that we'll get, and I'll paraphrase a little bit here, but how can I he uses the word successfully. How can I successfully coach management in agility? And I read that as, how do I get management to really buy into this thing, and how do I help coach management to help my teams be successful?
Okay. Wow, my first thought on coaching management is finding out what their understanding of agility is. So as a I don't know what role this person is in their company, but if they're trying to coach management, I'm assuming they're going to take that coaching or leadership stance at some point. So I'd start by finding out what their understanding of agility is, because I find that in my work and in my classes, there's just a lot of misconceptions around what agility really is. And then find out what's important for them. See if you can answer the "what's in it for me" question. I find that a lot of leaders, especially middle managers, really fear this agile change because they feel that as we delegate more down to the teams and we encourage more self-organization and a cross-functional nature to teams, that their benefit to the organization is minimized. So understanding where they're coming from and trying to have empathy for them is important. Another way I would answer this question is finding out what success looks like for them. So, and then trying to circle that back to an agile mindset to say, if they want to deliver all their projects on time, say, okay, that's fine. And figure out how to use Scrum and agility to do that. And then also to maybe coach them that on time is this nebulous thing and isn't a great measure of success. But I think it starts with understanding where they're coming from, where their foundation is, and trying to help answer the "what's in it for them" type question. And I'm happy to have some back and forth on this one, because leadership is something that I just get asked about all the time. I was coaching in one organization, and their phrase that they kept using is, all the senior leaders would say, "Jim, we need to move the needles. We have to move the needles. We have to move the needles." And I heard this so often that it almost made me laugh when I heard it. And I asked one of the senior leaders, I said, "Okay, what's a needle?" And he just kind of stopped and started looking up, and he said, "Well, I don't really know." And I said, "Well, don't you think you should know? If that's your phrase, you got to move the needles. What does success look like?" And he said, "Well, 65% of all of our projects should be agile projects." And I said, "Very good. Can I get a bonus when I'm done? Because I will meet that metric tomorrow." And he said, "Well, how will you meet that metric?" I said, "All your project managers are now Scrum Masters, and every project's now a Scrum project, and we'll throw it into your tool of choice, whether that's Jira or Azure DevOps or something. And will that make it a Scrum project?" "Well, yeah." "Okay, well then good. You can get your big bonus. But will that really move any needle? Will that really increase anything? Will that deliver any new value to the organization?"
So I thank you, Jim. I think that was
Sure.
excellent. I think this is kind of almost a follow-on question, because I think if you're going to do this, you're generally talking to management. But do you have any suggestions on practices or ways to, in quotes, sell agile? So when you're talking to management and trying to get the buy-in, how do you now get that buy-in from management on agile is important and why?
I think when it comes back to selling agile, I come at it from two different perspectives. From the human aspect first, because I firmly believe that, and I teach that agile is a more humanistic way of working. So it puts people first. Um, and that's based on my belief that if people are happy, if people are respected and heard and seen, that they're going to do their best work, and therefore the company is going to benefit from that. And then I also come at it from the foundational ideas of iterative and incremental, and customer feedback loops. So I will ask someone, what if we give you a little bit of something right now or very soon? We build on that in our next block of time, and we ask the customers what they think of it. And we take that feedback that we get from them and we make the next increment, the next chunk, just a little bit better than the previous one. Does anybody have a problem with that? And there's always some chuckling and laughing. Well, no, I don't have a problem with that. I'm like, okay, well, at the core of agility, that's what we're doing. At the core of Scrum, that's what we're doing. Is we're working iteratively and incrementally to deliver customer feedback while caring about human beings. And when I break it down to those kind of base ideas, nobody can argue it. Nobody can say this is a bad way of working. So then it just becomes mechanical to say, well, how do we work agile? And then we might move into something like backlog refinement or customer personas or value stream mapping or user story mapping or something, some technique to help people understand their work better and understand their customers better. And that gets into the mechanics, but I start by getting them to buy into these high level principles. And once I get them to buy into that and get them saying yes, 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 the selling becomes very easy. I don't know if that answered the question, but that's kind of where I start.
Excellent. Thank you. So this one's a little bit longer. Uh,
Okay.
how should we interpret convergence of story points? And Gizem goes on and talks about examples where they've seen on their team that initially looking, when the team first formed a year or so ago, everything was quite different. Now over time, their backlog seems to be sizing everything around the same size for every backlog item. Do you
Mm-hmm.
see any concerns about that? Do you have any experiences about in this area? Maybe they're just refining everything down to smaller items. Not
Yeah.
sure. But any experience you have as teams form and as they start to work together over a long period of time, and any concerns about this sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, Eric, is maybe they're really just getting good at sizing things consistently. So it could be a really good thing that a team is getting good at making things around the same size, because we talk in Kanban, in our professional Scrum with Kanban class, a lot about this idea of right sizing. And right sizing is ambiguous, but the way I teach it is, if you think about a restaurant or a retail establishment, the right amount of traffic and customers is different for different types of businesses. So if you go to a small diner that's maybe got 6 or 8 tables and 2 waitresses, or um, maybe one gentleman working the grill, they're going to be overwhelmed if a party of 12 walks in or 3 parties of 12 walk in. That is not the right size of a batch for that system to process. But yet, if 3 groups of 12 walk into the Cheesecake Factory or a large steakhouse in a big city, that might be what they want. They might be staffed, and their system might be optimized for parties of 6 to 10, 6 to 12, et cetera. It might be just an average day for them. And teams are no different. So getting good at right sizing their work. So what is good for one team may not be good for another. So when I hear convergence, if it's within a team or even a couple teams working on the same product, that might be the sign of a very good thing, because it might be a sign of good backlog refinement. They figured out what the right size for their system is, and they're able to deliver iteratively and incrementally with high probability and good feedback. It could also be a sign, though, of something very negative, which is apathy or just a lazy approach to refinement. And they just look at any piece of work and say that's a 5, because they know the scrum master or coach or the team will just, like, that's middle of the road, and they're just, using that as a, well, it's probably bigger than that, it could be smaller than that, but we're just going to say that so we can get through this process. And I call that apathy. So I don't know, just from this question, if it's a good thing or a bad thing. So my advice would be to dig in and find out. Use some other metrics to figure out if this size is truly consistent or not. And one thing we might look at in a flow-based system is something like cycle time, and say, well, are these things that we're estimating to be around the same size, are they moving through our system in the same time frame? And that might be a good indicator that they are truly the same size. But if you have a team who's routinely estimating 5 pieces of work at 3 points each, but they're moving through the system very differently, then that might be a sign that the team is either, getting lazy or apathetic during their estimation, or that they have some sort of unknown or ambiguity that is causing that size to move through the system differently.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
So our next question is a kind of a common one. We seem to hear quite a bit on these. So I'm a Scrum Master, and my team members are included in multiple projects. So it sounds like they're on multiple Scrum teams, and they don't want to come to the different Scrum meetings. Don't know if it's a lack of motivation, a lack of time, but what can I do as a Scrum Master to motivate the team to understand the value of the retro, of the dailies, of refinement, and so on? And or should we just move on from Scrum?
Oh, wow. How nice should I be, Eric? Should I be nice? Like, I don't know. This is my first one of these, so I don't know. But okay, so here's where my brain went immediately. And did you say that it's a Scrum Master asking this question? Did we know that?
It is a Scrum Master asking the question. Yeah.
So my first knee-jerk reaction, which is not fair because I am just a head on a screen, is the Scrum Master is probably not doing a very good job if the team routinely doesn't want to attend the Scrum events and doesn't see value in them. So my first stop is to ask the Scrum Master to get introspective and say, why might the team not be seeing the benefit of the Scrum events? And almost without fail, when I do this, I find that the Scrum Master is either not understanding the true value and outcomes that we're trying to drive to in the different Scrum events, or they're just become lazy, or maybe they're just a new Scrum Master and they don't know. They don't, I was a terrible Scrum Master for a long period of time, longer than I would like to admit. And I facilitated and led a whole bunch of crappy Scrum events. So if my team had said, I don't want to come to your retrospective, Jim, I looking back, I couldn't blame them, because I wasn't doing it very well. I wasn't facilitating it very well. So that's my first advice for whoever's asking this question, is figure out if you're the problem. And if you're not the problem, then I would ask the team, why do you not see value in the Scrum event? What would make it better? How might we improve this Scrum event? One other kind of story that comes to my mind is I had a team who hated sprint planning. And when I was coaching in that organization, I was kind of put in to replace a previous Scrum Master. And they said, yeah, we hate sprint planning. We don't want to do it. Are you going to make us do it? And I said, well, why do you hate it? I mean, that's very strong language. And they said, well, our previous Scrum Master used to lock us in the room for 4 hours and make us do sprint planning for the time box. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. What do you mean lock you in a room for 4 hours? They said, well, she told us we weren't allowed to leave until the time box expired and blah, 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 and all this stuff. I said, well, okay, we're not treating people like human beings at this point. and that Scrum Master has a misconception about what a time box is. It's a not to exceed. It's not time that the team owes you. If the team can get through that Scrum event and deliver on a great outcome in an hour, then they're done. So there was a lot of things at play here. But then when I really started to unpack it, it wasn't even what I would recognize as sprint planning. It was more of a project-based commitment exercise with leadership in there and other people inside the organization badgering the team to promise to the triple constraints of scope, budget, and time. So then I totally get it. I got why the team didn't want to see the value in that event. So again, it sounds like I'm dodging some of these questions, but I don't have one answer. But I hope I've given you some things to think about, which is, are you the problem? Why? What's in it for the team? And maybe run some learning activities or just have a session and say, well, why aren't you seeing value in this? And really listen to them. I'm very passionate about sprint retrospectives, and they're one of the most common sources of complaints from teams. Is they're like, our retrospectives are terrible, they're a waste of time. But without fail, I can say without fail that when I dig into this, it's because the retrospectives are not being facilitated correctly, or the team, or there's something else at play. The Scrum event itself is not the problem. The application and implementation of the event is the problem. And that's not to say Scrums without fail is never the problem, but it's almost always human beings who are creating the problem. I used to create the problem when I would facilitate bad retrospectives.
Cool. So I think kind of tying along with some of these this conversation, I think this is a good one to keep this going. Besides being able to plan accurately and forecast releases, and it being a Scrum value, why does meeting the sprint commitment, so I think there's some misunderstanding that you can go through here. Why does meeting the sprint commitment matter for an apathetic team? I'm struggling to motivate a team who has no real repercussions on not meeting their commitment and have no sense of urgency. Sounds like there's some sprint goal conversations to happen here as well.
Yeah. Wow, thank you. You teed this one up for me. So first of all, let's investigate this idea of a commitment. So the way I teach it, Scrum teams commit to two different things. They actually maybe three. They commit to the sprint goal, first of all. So they commit to doing anything in their power within reason to meet the sprint goal. They commit to Scrum, because if we assume they're a Scrum team, I hope they're committed to Scrum. And they're committed to each other. That's kind of the third thing. So they're committed to working with the other human beings on their Scrum team with trust and respect, and keeping these Scrum values at play and in mind. And if we look at commitment as those things, I think you'll immediately have some reactions, whoever asks this question. If we're looking at commitment as getting all the work in the sprint done, that's not a sprint goal. A sprint goal is never, I will get all the work done in the sprint. And I encourage teams to set very robust, smart sprint goals. So they're measurable, they're specific, they're attainable, relevant, time box, whatever your definition of SMART goal is. But they have to have some sort of value. And then how can we get to that value the easiest, quickest, cheapest way possible so that we can learn fast? And if teams have that understanding about what they're committing to, it almost immediately changes the conversation. But let's go to the next part of your question, which is, the team doesn't seem to see value in meeting their commitments. So let's say that a team, one of the first things that I start to track on teams is sprint goals met, and it's very binary for me. Either you met the sprint goal or you didn't. There's no gray. It's red or green. And I will normally make this big and visible for a team over the course of sprints. And I'll say, well, if we have historical data for sprint goals, maybe you've been using them. Tell me what your historical data is, and I'll make it big and visible, and I'll see red, 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 green, red, red, green, maybe. And then I'll say, what would it take for us to meet the sprint goal? And almost without exception, their de facto response is to start to set simpler sprint goals. And based on the maturity of the team and the product and a couple other factors, I may or may not encourage them to do that. But say, I would rather you meet an attainable goal than to continuously set unattainable goals. That's, the A in SMART. Achievable, attainable, depending what your definition of a SMART goal is. But I like to give people this track record of setting the correct expectation and then meeting it. And I might kind of dumb it down a little bit and say, let's set a very attainable goal and then meet that goal. And that'll start to change the conversation with the product owner, with leadership. It'll start to change the motivation and mentality of that team. People want to succeed. I have found that if I set a reasonable expectation and I meet it, I just feel better inside myself. And then I might want to stretch more to make a more difficult goal. So that's kind of where I would go with this question. The other thing that I routinely see at play here when teams don't have, let's say they have a good sprint goal and they're being measured and they have the right mindset, but they just don't feel this internal drive for doing it, or they don't have this internal accountability, is then they might be disconnected from the value of their work. So I would start to really show them how their work has meaning and value. And if it doesn't, I'd get it for them. One of the things I was able to do as a Scrum Master and as a coach in one organization is I took our team directly to our customers. And we were working on an e-learning platform that served K through 12. And I took a team and we sat in a classroom full of 9 and 10-year-olds in Ohio. And when they got to see those students using the output of their work, and they got to see that teachers struggling with bugs and defects in their software, they were moved. And before that, their customer was just this nebulous stakeholder. But when you sit with your customers and watch them use your product and listen to them and have empathy for them, it's very impactful. But if I really feel bad for teams that feel like they're working sprint after sprint and they're getting really good at delivering story points. They're getting really good at delivering on their promises, but they don't feel their work matters. Or they are not able to see the big picture. So that's another piece of advice, is help your team see the big picture.
Thanks, Jim.
Sure.
So what advice would you give a Scrum Master working within an organization that is still very much waterfall in terms of flexibility, taking on some of the more traditional project management tasks, and so on? It sounds like, as Dave West would call it, a little bit of water scrumfall.
Yeah, water scrumfall is a common ailment in many organizations. I was spending years with a company here in Ohio who put Scrum teams in the middle of 2 large waterfall processes. So their work intake process was very waterfall, very command and control, took 12 to 18 months to get work to a team. Then they wanted Scrum to be really successful in the middle, and then their release process, so their delivery to customers and the grabbing of value was very waterfall, to the point where there could be entire months separated between the end of work and actually releasing it to customers. And this organization was surprised that Scrum teams were demotivated and Scrum was quote unquote failing. But so we have to put Scrum teams and people in systems that they can win. Nobody likes to play a game that you can never win. And Scrum's not really a game, but it's a way of working. So we have to be able to create a system where people can be successful. So the way I would start, and the way I advise that organization to start, is you got to remove one of those 2 boulders, either the beginning of the process or the end. So how can we enable the team to either get work in a more agile, more stream, like continuous flow manner, or how can they release? Like, you can't put them inside these 2 immovable objects. So that was one piece of advice I gave them. Another piece is having empathy for your traditional project managers. I was a traditional project manager for a period of time. I hated that portion of my career, but I did it. So understand that PMs and PMOs and other people that work differently, they have wants, needs, desires. They have leadership. They have families. They have bills they need to pay. They have job satisfaction that they're chasing too. So figure out ways to build bridges instead of walls. So that's one of the things I encourage people to do is find bridges instead of walls. And if you've got walls, put some windows in. So how can you work with people that are in these siloed, walled gardens, if you will, and start to introduce Agile and Scrum at kind of the grassroots effort, and it might start by saying, well, can we do this? Can we work this way? Or can we have a backlog refinement session? Can we do value stream mapping? Can we have some flexibility in scope? Because if we think about a waterfall approach, it's normally, hallmarked by the triple constraints. So which of those three constraints, time, scope, and budget, can you flex on? Budget is normally the hardest for people to flex on. Scope is normally the easiest. So I would kind of start there, because I think that most people don't understand their scope, and most projects fail to deliver the scope that they start with anyway. So my advice normally is let's stop lying. So that's one other way I would answer this question is how does an organization start down the agile path if they find themselves very waterfall? Is let's start by being honest. And I call that radical transparency, which is kind of a mixture of two ideas of transparency and radical candor. So I am going to be radically transparent. I'm going to tell people all the hard stuff, all the bad news immediately, early, often, big, visible, and I'm willing to take the hits for it. I am going to be radically transparent, because it's facts, it's data. We don't have to like it. We can have an emotional response to it, but it's very hard to argue with facts and data. And I see a lot of traditional waterfall-based organizations spending a lot of time, a lot of machinations around obfuscating the truth, and calling projects green when they're not green, and calling work on time when we all know it's not on time, and calling scope locked when we all know it's not locked. So yeah, sorry I was rambling a bit, but this is just a hot button for me, and there's no one answer here. So hopefully there was some help in there for whoever asked that question.
That's great. Thanks, Jim. And yeah, I think this is one of the things, and Ken Schwaber talks about this all the time, that sometimes people don't like Scrum because it exposes all the truths.
Yeah.
And it really will bring out the realities of what are happening in the organization. And often people like to hide.
Yes.
So it makes it difficult, but it's the value that Scrum is also bringing, because it's helping us transform, it's helping us change and do the right things. But you have to be prepared for those truths and for the realities of what's really happening. We've all been on those projects. I worked on a product where every month's review was we're 18 months away. This was a very waterfall product. Every month we had a review with our CEO and CTO, and we were 18 months away. And 18 months away, 6 months later, we're still 18 months away. And honestly, I lost a lot of respect for our leadership at that point, because they never once called the team on the fact that, wait, weren't we 18 months away 6 months ago?
Time is funny that way, isn't it?
It is. It's okay. So when are you gonna hit it? Oh, we're probably about 18 months away. Okay.
Yeah. Well, that 18-month horizon is what my dad would refer to as the white dog, because I had a problem when I was a young driver, 16 years old. I kept getting in these little fender benders, and I always blamed this white dog. It just ran out in front of me, and that's why I hit that car, and that's why I went in the ditch, and that's why there's that new ding in the truck. And one day my dad said, "Man, I hate that damn white dog. That white dog has cost me a lot of money." But you kind of made me think of something else. So I've been doing a lot of virtual classes lately, and I've been using this tool called Mural to kind of teach. And one of the things that I have started saying, I think this last year, and I've written a blog about it, is Scrum is an illumination framework. So this kind of sparked from when I was walking through the building with a leader, and he told me Scrum is failing us. And I said, how is Scrum failing you? And he said, well, it's failing to deliver on its promises. And I said, oh, tell me more. What promises? Well, and he said, better, faster, cheaper. And I said, oh, well, there's the problem, James. You don't know what Scrum is good at, why it exists. And he said, well, tell me. And I said, it is here to illuminate your problems. Scrum is not a silver bullet. It is not going to fix anything for you by itself. But what it's going to do is shine a flashlight in the dark corners of your organization, from the people, the processes, the tools. You still have to do the hard work as an executive to solve those problems. But there is no place, I like to say, there is no place on a Scrum team to hide. A good Scrum team that is utilizing the Scrum values and is using empiricism, there is no room on that team for a bad person to hide. They will become obvious. Now, whether or not that team has the chutzpah to address that problem is different. Same thing with an organization where Scrum will highlight your problems. It's up to you if you want to ignore them or not, but that's where radical transparency comes in. I was working with a company last year, and they suffered from what I called Groundhog Day syndrome. So every quarter was a giant release. And every quarter, every project that was in that coordinated release was green. It was all green, and there was lots of fanfare and ice cream socials and lots of smiles and kickoff meetings and lots of happy people. Then as the quarter went on, a lot of project managers started to show these projects as scary colors on charts, and a lot of conversations were had and get to green plans and all this. And then at the end, there is this, oh my gosh, we're not green, we're flashing red, we're all behind, let's slash scope, let's slash this and add a bunch of people. Then there was a Herculean effort, lots of overtime, death march projects, pulling late nights, long weekends, and we got the release out the door, and then the executives would send a bunch of congratulatory emails and say, thank you everyone for your hard work, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next quarter would start, and it would be like everyone had forgotten what just happened. And I said, this is a cycle. Like the last 12 quarters, this has happened. And I could point to it, I can find the emails, and everything would start green again. So I threw this idea out there. I said, what if every project in this company started red, and we said everything's behind, because more than often it was anyway. And we all work hard to make it green, but we be real honest about what a green project is, and it's not the triple constraints. And I was laughed out of the room, but a lot of people who were important understood what I was trying to say, which is we needed to rethink what success looked like for a project, and we need to stop putting the triple constraints in place around people and calling it agile.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
I think those are some really good stories and examples to really help emphasize that why agile or why not, and what not. Kind of following on to this is a common one. This next question reminds me of a presentation I did a few years ago now at Agile Australia around a myth of the title of the presentation was, who says there's no planning in Scrum? This question is kind of similar in a vein. Eleanor asks, what should you do when internal stakeholders are asking for release dates, both for features as well as a larger, more complex work? Is it reasonable for a ballpark estimate to be given, refined as we learn more, and so on, or is it reasonable to give any kind of estimate in the first place? And the reason it's reminded me of that session is, I think there's this myth out there that we don't do estimates, we don't do planning, we just kind of work, and when it happens, it happens. And this question kind of gives me that feeling. What are your thoughts around giving estimates and estimating?
My simple answer to Eleanor's question is yes. it is reasonable to give dates and give estimates and to work with stakeholders to be deadline driven. I think that where the rubber meets the road on this, though, is making sure that we maintain some flexibility and we understand that an estimate is just that. It's an estimate. It's going to be wrong, um, and that we should not set incorrect expectations um, for any reason, either knowingly or unknowingly. So we need to preserve that ability to be wrong. But I just don't think in 2020 in the modern workplace that you can just say I can't tell you when we're going to be done. That's not a leg that I feel you can stand on. You have to be able to say this is how much work we get done. This is about how long it normally takes. This is what you're asking us to do. So here's a projection for when we'll be done, assuming, and then going through all your assumptions. Um, and then using Scrum and other ideas to eliminate assumptions. And I like to encourage teams to to move away from the words should and could. So I will challenge them all the time to say, how can we turn this should into a can? Or how could we turn this maybe into a yes? And they say, well, we'd have to have the answer to this, this, and this. I say, okay, we'll go get those answers. And then as we start to eliminate these assumptions and these risks, our accuracy and our planning will become more realistic and better. And I also see a lot of value in working with stakeholders and others to plan together and to see how that'll drive up trust and integrity with people. So I worked at one company, this is like 6 or 7 years ago, and one of the senior agilists would say, yeah, we're not telling you when we'll be done. It'll be done when it's done. And I took a different approach with my team and my product. And I said, this is when we think we're going to be done based on what we know today. We're going to keep you apprised of our progress. And occasionally we're going to deliver late, and occasionally we're going to deliver early. And then sometimes maybe we'll land the plane exactly on the dot. And they valued and really appreciated that openness and that candor. And it led them to trust the team when the team would say yes or no to something. If they asked the team, hey, can you integrate Microsoft Office 365 by next June? And the team says yes, they started to have trust in that. But when the team would say, no, we can't get that feature out the door by December 31st, they started to trust that as well, because the team had built up that trust over time by, you know, being a partner and coming to the table and using data to show that. Or they would, a lot of times the answer wasn't yes or no, it was we could, but this has to flex because we can't give you this and everything else you've already asked for. And I think that's really where it comes down to one of the agile values of, you know, collaboration over contracts and you know, interactions.
And I think even adding to that, Jim, it comes down to, and oh, by the way, scope might change because
Mm-hmm.
along the way we may learn things that change what you asked us to deliver or the question that you're asking.
Yeah.
Because there are unknowns. If this was all, if everything we're doing was a known, it would be simple. But it's not, and yeah, and we're going to learn, and maybe features will change, maybe requirements will change, maybe nobody knew COVID was coming. Well, certainly not a year ago. So there were
Mm-hmm.
many things you didn't plan on not being able to leave your house for months, and that changes scope. There's lots of things that impact, and that changes features. So,
Yeah.
there's lots of things that happen that change it, but there's no reason we can't estimate what's going to happen. Generally, you've got a vision and you're working off a vision. We teach this in our product owner class quite a bit. And we can estimate, okay, based on this vision, here's what my beginnings of my product backlog are going to look like. I can work with the team to start to say, okay, over the next, say, 3 to 6 sprints, what do we think we can deliver? And that's going to change, and it should change. But at least it gives us that idea, and we can have that conversation and have those communications.
Yeah. And that's really where estimation and getting good at predicting and influencing the future based on the past, which is empiricism, it is helpful. So we can say, look, we've never done more than X amount of work. So why would you try and get us to promise to do this much work in, this time frame? Like, it's kind of trying to put 5 pounds of flour in a 3-pound bag. You just, no matter how much you want it to happen, it can't happen. To say something has to give. And if I tell you that I can do that, I'm lying to you. Um, so it was kind of funny, and I worked at actually the same organization from one of my previous stories, and the product owner had a vision, and one of his bosses, so a very, very senior person in the company, told him, he said, I'm tired of this vision and this roadmap changing. I want you to laminate this. So he said, laminate. So what I heard was, I want you to not change your mind every week. But what the product owner heard was, you want me to literally laminate my vision. So he came into the next meeting and with a lot of fanfare handed out like 20 copies of this big like menu that was laminated. It looked like a Waffle House menu, like a diner menu. And I just didn't know, and it was a product roadmap and all these dates and all this, and it was laminated. And the CIO started laughing and he goes, well, what is this? He goes, well, you told me to laminate it. And he's like, yeah, but it's already outdated, right? Because I see this here, and you told me in an email last night at 11:45 p.m. that this is no. Well, yeah, I'll get you another laminate. And he goes, oh, you're missing the point here. But then if you color that idea of an unchanging vision with somebody that, because you brought up COVID, I have a lot of empathy for, is imagine if you're like the product owner for Zoom, or you're the product owner for Mural, or you're the product owner for Microsoft Teams, and COVID hits. I guarantee you their backlogs look very different very quickly, because the real world affected their vision. Things that were no longer, or that were not very important, now became immensely important, and their backlog had to change on the fly to, um, be more applicable for the current world. And it was funny because what we saw was Zoom's number one most compelling feature for a while was their virtual backgrounds and the ability to have these fun, quirky backgrounds in your Zoom meetings. And I guarantee you that companies like Microsoft and Cisco and others, their backlogs change and said, how do we get that? That's what everybody likes. That's what they're having fun with. And it doesn't matter if you had the most secure platform, or the most robust platform. Everybody wanted virtual background until the security of your platform was splashed around newspapers around the world, and that affected your backlog. So there's a case study I'm sure being written right now about how COVID affected this remote work and these product backlogs, because it's just kind of funny that some of the tools us Agilists use were heavily affected in front and center on newspapers around the world. So of course we plan, but our plans have to change. We have to maintain that flexibility to have the real world influence where we're headed. We can't laminate things, but we also can't show up to every meeting every week with a wholly new vision and expect people not to become demotivated.
Well, and I think we have to separate vision from backlog to a
Yeah,
point. Right? Obviously, the backlog needs to support the vision, but the vision isn't the backlog. The
right.
vision is where we want to go, the overview, if you will, and the backlog is how we're going to get there. And if we're changing our vision every week, we've got a problem, because it means we really don't know where we're heading.
Yeah,
If we're changing our backlog every week, it means we're learning on how to achieve that vision. And they're two different things that need to be kind of coupled in some ways and decoupled in others.
yep, absolutely.
So speaking of visions and product owners, this next question is an interesting one. The product owner wants to take over my sessions. I'm assuming you're a Scrum Master. The product owner wants to take over my sessions and become product manager. How do I
Mm.
coach and enable the product owner without getting myself unemployed?
Wow, a lot of possible things at play here. So let me get a few sound bites out to you. The Scrum Master teaches people which interactions with the team are helpful and which ones are not helpful. So I would first look at it as to say, is what the product owner or product manager wanting to do, is it going to be helpful for the team? And that might be a source of coaching and where you have to insert yourself to protect the team and all that. But if it is helpful, I might encourage it, because the Scrum Master, it's not their job to facilitate everything. It's not their job to be the center of the wheel, the center of the hub, if you will. So don't create like a hierarchy where the Scrum Master has to be involved and do everything. Some of the best Scrum Masters are really good at encouraging and enabling others to take the lead on different things. Um, Another thing that comes to mind is product management is a series of actions and activities and behaviors and tools and processes, but a product owner is a person. So I would say that if you have a product owner who is wanting to move into product management, one of the things that would lead me to ask is, do they still want to be the product owner, or do they want to do something else that is in that product management job description? And I don't know, but we know that teams need a product owner. We know that a product owner has to have a vision and a product and all those things that Scrum requires and that a good product owner has. But product management is different than that. A product owner can't and shouldn't try and do everything by themselves. Um, but what I think I routinely see, and what I think your question is getting at, is you have you have a dominant product owner who is trying to step outside their lane a little bit and maybe do things that traditionally the Scrum Master would consider theirs. And if I come at it from that perspective, I would still kind of come back to, is that okay? And maybe it's okay. Um, if the team is self-organizing around the product owner doing certain things, then I'm okay with that. And I would encourage a Scrum Master to get okay with that, as long as it's helpful and not harmful, and as long as it's the team making that decision. Um, what do you think, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, I think you don't, as a Scrum Master, have to own the meeting.
Right.
But you're there to help facilitate as needed. You're there to participate as needed. At the end of the day, the product owner is ultimately responsible for delivering value,
Yeah.
and they will call on others to help them. Right? It says very clearly in the Scrum Guide that they are responsible for it, but they don't necessarily do all of the work. In many cases, they can't be the expert in everything or do all of the work, and they're going to bring in other people from the Scrum team and possibly others as services to the Scrum team to help them. I think it's less about, as a Scrum Master, worrying that somebody's taking over your Scrum team and figuring out, all right, what are we trying to do and how do we collaborate?
Yeah.
And coaching around collaboration, if they really are completely just taking over, that might be a bit of a different issue than they are, leading the meeting. Maybe that's what the team wants too. Maybe it's a conversation across the whole team in the retrospective of, hey, I feel like Joe is taking over. Are you getting what you need as a team?
Yep.
In doing it. If people don't feel safe, you can do this in other ways. You can do blind surveys of the team, not calling out Joe specifically. But there's lots of techniques that can be used to start to look at, is it a problem? Because maybe it's not a problem, maybe it is. I think as the Scrum Master, if you're enabling and empowering them to work together, you're doing your job if they're getting what they need.
Yeah. Yeah. As you were talking, kind of reminded me of a few things that had happened to me. There was one time very early in my career as a Scrum Master where the product owner came by my desk and said, "Hey, just so you know, I just had this, and this happen, and I asked so and so on the team to do this, and this is what we're doing." And I immediately reacted poorly, and I'm like, you can't just do that. You just can't go off half-cocked and ask the team to do this, and you have to come to me. And I try to insert myself in this process. And he was taken aback, and he and I went and had lunch. He's like, let's go talk about this. And through talking to him, and he was a very senior, very good product owner, I realized pretty quickly that I was feeling insecure and feeling like I had to feel a sense of ownership and responsibility for things that I really didn't have to. So I find Scrum Mastery very empowering because I own very little as a Scrum Master, but I'm responsible and involved in almost everything. So when a Scrum Master tells me that, they're losing sleep and they're constantly stressed and anxious, one of the things I come back to is, are you going to fight battles that are not yours to fight? Are you making problems that are not your problems? And if you're doing all those things, are you not being a good Scrum Master? What are you not doing if you're worrying about all those other things? So that's one thing. The other thing that I sometimes help organizations do is kind of create what I call an agile RACI or a Scrum RACI chart to figure out who is responsible and accountable and involved in different things. And as a product owner, you are accountable for a lot of things, but you are not necessarily the responsible party for many things. So you can abdicate and delegate responsibility, but you cannot delegate the accountability for that. And that's really why product ownership is so hard. One of the other things that I teach is that there is a difference for a product owner between authority and accountability. Authority is something that someone gives you. It's external. The organization gives you authority. Leadership gives you authority. Your position in the company comes with certain authority. But accountability is something you can choose to have or not. I don't care where you're at in the org chart. You can choose to be accountable to yourself, to your team, to your product, to your customers, to your stakeholders. You can't be forced to take accountability, but you can choose to give it up if you'd like. So yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily see it as a bad thing. The other kind of story that comes to mind, and I know we're hitting up on time here, is I had a product owner who was kind of, eliciting some of these behaviors that this question mentions. And really what it was is she didn't feel listened to. So as a Scrum Master, the most important thing I did was start to listen to her. And I say, why are you trying to dominate everything? That you're turning the team off. The team is coming to me with concerns and complaints. And she's like, well, they just don't listen to me and this, and nobody's doing what I say. And a lot of that led to a lot of coaching conversations between me as the Scrum Master and her as the product owner to help her feel more listened to by the team and to kind of foster that conflict resolution. And that went a long way to repairing and building a stronger relationship between the product owner and the development team. She just didn't feel listened to.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jim. I want to be conscious of our time box here as we're starting to run up against it. So I want to thank everybody for joining today. I want to thank you for taking your time, taking, Jim, of course, your time as well.
Sure.
Continue your learning. This is all about continued and ongoing learning. Join the product owner, I'm sorry, join the different learning paths. These are free. They're up on the Scrum.org website, and they're to help your continued learning. Check them out. You can see the links there. If you just go to the website, click resources, and you'll see the different learning paths. Lots of content. We're constantly adding new content and arranging the content based on ratings and other things. And with that, connect with us, follow us on our forums, or join the forums and the conversations on social media. Lots of great, amazing blogs being written by our professional Scrum trainers on a daily basis, and continue watching this series and others. And with that, again, thank you very much, Jim. Thank you to our audience for all these wonderful questions, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, all. I think I want to make this into a podcast.